Chapter 7. Repay. Our greatest tingle during the spring 1979 Bombay race meeting was the announcement of a blessed event, the debut in our world of Stoney's first foal, a colt whom Vimalananda promptly named Redstone. The spring's most unusual incident, however, occurred mid-season when Vimalananda felt obliged to exercise yet another of his siddhis to deal with Baram, the husband of Shehnaz and father of Arzu. He had unexpectedly and inopportunely arrived in Pune from Iran, just in time for Navroz, the ancient Persian New Year's Day, which many Indian Zoroastrians still celebrate. Vimalananda hurried to Pune a few days after Baram's arrival and summoned me to Shehnaz's place. I arrived there to find him sitting in Shehnaz's front room, smoking and remonstrating with her. Seeing me, he smiled with some cynicism and said, "What a life I lead! Is it my job to take responsibility for everybody's evil karmas? If you knew this family's whole history, you will know what I am up against. Here is Baram, a boozer and womanizer, who used to spend all his money on himself and beat his wife if she asked for any. When it came to the stage that he had decided to desert Shehnaz and the children, I lost my temper. I came here when he was out and told Shehnaz to give me 2 matchsticks, which I tied together with the help of a mantra. Then I told her, 'Take these. If Baham can ever leave you as long as you have these, I will cut my own throat.' That was more than 20 years ago, and they are still together, and so are the matchsticks. Shehnaz proudly showed them to me. Times were tough then, so I told Shehnaz, 'Every day when you go to the little corner where you pray, you will find 10 rupees. That money is meant for food for you and your children. As long as you don't misuse it, you will continue to receive it every day of your life. The day you start to act funny, that will be it.' For years 10 rupees appeared daily. She used that money to help keep the wolf away from her door. Sad to say though, and I'm saying it in front of her, her intellect eventually became perverted." "No, it wasn't that way at all. "Yes, perverted," he insisted, as Shehnaz strove to defend herself. "I know what I am saying. Don't try to deny it. Did you or did you not start to waste that money on liquor, meat, cinemas, and other such trifles?" "But that was all for the children." He cut her short. "But you were told it was for food, weren't you?" But she continued to try to justify her actions, and Vimalananda, seeing her contrite, overrode her and continued, "One day there was no money there. She came to me to complain, but I told her, 'I warned you. If you have bungled, I can't help it. Now you please do without.'" "And what about your Masi," meaning maternal aunt, he said to Shehnaz, annoyed. "What about that dog I gave her? When she and her husband," he said to me, resuming his narrative tone, "were passing through a difficult period, I gave them a small dog. So long as the dog remained in their house, their fortunes skyrocketed." Back to Shehnaz. "And what about the day your Masi cut her wrists? It was only because the dog set up a howl that people were drawn there and saved her." Back to me. "Unfortunately, she or her husband made a mistake one day, and the dog disappeared. It ran away and was never seen again. Then she came to me for another dog, but I told her, 'You don't get halva,' which is an Indian sweet, 'whenever you please. You had your chance, and you were not meant for it. Now forget it.
Anyway, your work was done. You got your prosperity. Now hold on to it. After I joined the matchsticks together for Shonaz, Baram got a steady, though low-paying job and started sending money to his family. Eventually, he went to the Middle East, where he started to earn lots of money. Now, he has just landed here and was announced that he will never go back to work. He feels it is time for him to relax and live off his children's earnings. But the rest of the family doesn't agree with him. Ask Shonaz, Arzu, and Sorab, and they will say, "Send him back." So now what should I do? If I don't interfere, he will become comfortable here, and their lives will become hell. And I hate to see that happen to any of my children. And if I do interfere, well, there'll be some karma involved, and we'll see what happens. Our talk then turned to horses and courses until Baram made his appearance. That night we drank Baram's scotch. The next night, Vimalananda, who had carried a bottle of scotch with him from Bombay, brought his bottle over to Baram's house to offer him drinks in celebration of his return to India. After a couple of drinks, Baram's tongue began to wag freely as he explained all about his plans for his retired life. He was in the midst of describing his plans for his new life in India. Saurabh has a job. Arzu will be out of school and then can get one. And we should be able to live comfortably on what they earn. When all at once Angina entered Vimalananda's body and gave that poor wretch a withering glance. Baram stopped short in mid-sentence, looking dazed and confused. After a few moments he pulled himself together and said, "No, no, my children should continue as they have been. I will go back and see that they enjoy life at my expense. I am proud to be able to take care of them." All of us spectators were simultaneously stunned and pleased, but we took great care to show no emotion whatsoever, lest Baram change his mind yet again. Vimalananda left for Bombay the next day, and it was only a couple of weeks later, after Baram had departed for the Middle East, and Vimalananda had again appeared in Pune, that anyone even dared to mention the events of that evening. Vimalananda was bemused by the whole episode. What an unexpected turn of mind, to have him change his tune in mid-sentence, eh? Isn't it amazing what Angina can do? "Are you sure you didn't put something in his drink?" I asked suspiciously. "It was so sudden, such an abrupt reversal of plan." "Are you talking out of your wits, Robbie? You were drinking from the same bottle. You tell me, was there something in the scotch?" "You know very well what I mean." "Well, nothing physical was added to the scotch. What was added came from elsewhere. The nice thing is that Baram thinks he has changed his mind on his own. That pampers his ego and makes it less likely that he will change his mind again any time soon. He's the kind of guy that likes to make a decision and stick with it, even if it's the wrong decision. Tamasic people are like that." Shonaz then began to thank Vimalananda profusely, but before she could pick up her steam, he derailed her. "Angina did the job, didn't he? You'd better thank him instead of me. But now that your work has been done, it's time to have some fun. Let's celebrate. If you had gone to some sadhu or fakir to do your work, he would have taken your money and had you bow down to him and told you to leave. But I am not a sadhu or a fakir. I don't think you will ever run into any sadhu or fakir who is such a toy to be played with." "So is that what you are?" I asked, pleased. "A toy?" "For those who love me, I am. Everyone in the world is miserable, all due to the effects of their karmas. Why not try to lighten things up? At Vimalananda's insistence, we then enjoyed some drinks, helped him cook a delicious dinner, and ate together in the midst of what he called a laughing spree. Pune allowed Vimalananda time for repose and enjoyment, for fewer people came to disturb him there than when we held court in Bombay. He thus had more occasion to lighten things up in the lives of his local loved ones. He delivered his tales with impeccable timing, and his jokes were always in good taste, even when they were vulgar. Many of them came from the classics. Sanskrit is a samskaric bhaksha, meaning a well-bred language, he would say. Even its dirty jokes are refined. Here is one. Once a young man wanted to make a living in the king's court as a poet. No one values poets nowadays, but back then kings made careers in poetry possible. When he arrived at the gate that led into the king's palace, however, the young man found that he could never seem to catch the king's attention. The monarch was always surrounded by big, important pundits who did not like competition, and so kept the king perpetually entertained. After a few days of this disappointment, the young man became frustrated, and wrote on the wall at the king's doorway in a bit of a Sanskrit verse. I'll translate it for you. The king's door is like a vulva, and the pundits are like a penis. They enter and exit over and over again, enjoying great bliss, whereas I, like the testicles, must remain outside, eternally squeezed between the two. Note the hidden meanings as well. By comparing the king's entranceway to a vagina, he also meant that the king was being screwed by the ambitious pundits. By comparing the pundits to a penis, he was suggesting that they had all the intelligence of a pizzle, and so on. When the king emerged from his palace the next day and saw this bit of doggerel, he was struck by its sophistication, and asked who had written it. When the young man was produced in front of him, he congratulated him on his sagacity, and welcomed him into his court as a full-fledged poet. Another favorite anecdote of Vimalananda's, which even today's current Benares addresses the important question of how can we know that the famous poet Kalidasa was the he-man of his time? The answer: Kalidasa was one day wandering partly clothed along the banks of the Kshipa river, when he came across a bathing beauty. Embarrassed, the girl quickly covered her breasts with one arm and her pubic region with the other. Simultaneously overcome with both passion and inspiration, Kalidasa composed a poem in a flash. O fortunate young woman, who can cover with but a hand her nakedness! O fortunate Kalidasa, who even after grasping himself with both fists, finds that 2 fingers' worth yet remain to be concealed. Wide-eyed at her vision of his manhood, the girl cried, "Oh my, yes!" We thus have her testimony that he was the he-man of his time. Vimalananda's teasing was also refined, particularly when he turned his truly unrivaled linguistic abilities to its service. Once I lived in a place where my neighbor woman, whose name was Dhani, used to do nothing but gossip all day long. I used to call her Mrs. Wagging Tongue. At first I ignored her, but finally I got so fed up with her that I decided to teach her a lesson. You know how much I like to sing. Well, on that day I composed a new song. Dhani Gappa Mare, Sanya Gappa Mare, meaning, Dhani is gossiping. Why is she gossiping? And I began to sing it loudly. When Dhani heard it, she confronted me. She asked me what I thought I was doing. I told her innocently, "All I'm doing are my vocal exercises. You know how to sing an Indian scale, don't you? The scale goes sa re ga ma pa di ni sa. I'm singing nothing beyond those syllables." And then I began to sing even more louder. Da ni ga pa ma re, sa ni ga pa ma re, da ni ga pa ma re, and so on, until it was obvious that she understood me. I had no trouble with her gossiping thereafter. Vimalananda also liked to demonstrate that ordinary speech can also work wonders when delivered judiciously. On one occasion, as Dr. Martanda and Arzu and I were driving outside Pune, we saw so many grapes growing alongside the road that we became hungry for some. We stopped where we saw a heavy-set man working in his vineyard, and Dr. Martanda insisted on approaching him for us. But when he tried to show off his knowledge by telling the man how unhealthy he looked, the fellow told him, "Get out of here! I won't sell you anything." Then I told Arzu to go address the farmer as Pahalvan, meaning wrestler, and go speak to him sweetly. When she did, he told her, "Not only can you have some grapes, my girl, you can have them for free, but don't give him any," he said, pointing to Dr. Martanda. "He can't have any at all." Vimalananda obligingly placed his talents for communication at my service, when during June and July of 1979 I busied myself with my mother, who had come all the way to India to see for herself my condition and to scrutinize the crowd I had fallen in with. Vimalananda, who regularly reminded me of my Runanubandhana with my parents and the need to fulfill it gracefully, acted the part of host to perfection. Training all his powers of persuasion on her, to convince her of the worth of my studies, he saw first to it that her Bombay tour was a red-letter one, and then set us up with his friends and associates in other parts of India. She and I travelled together pleasingly for 5 weeks, capping our circuit with a last visit to Vimalananda. She departed confident that I was indeed in good hands, and I could then reoccupy myself with racing. There was no laughter in Repay's life that summer, for he had lost his gonads and was now expecting to start earning his corn bill. He had dropped down into Class 5B during the period when he was quaffing semen, but now that he was not preoccupied with his penis, his interest in racing improved dramatically. By August 1979, he had become fit enough for a hard gallop, which Vimalananda and I drove down to Pune to watch. We had Taimul schedule it before dawn, that we might watch Repay work without betraying his fine fettle to any tipsters or gamblers. We followed the same procedure at every morning gallop. A swing by the stables to inform Taimul of our arrival, and to make a quick check of the horse before he set hoof to track. A sprint to the stands to take split timings for each furlong, which is 200 meters, of the run on our stopwatches, and a sprint back to the stables to check the horse's wind and legs as he high-stepped his way back in. When the grandstands at a racecourse are empty, and a single horse flies down the track, bunching and releasing his muscles in the exhilaration of the sprint, you can hear otherwise inaudible sounds that can be remarkably diagnostic. The whoosh of the galloper's body, the thud of his hooves, even sometimes the grunt of his breathing. On this occasion we both heard and saw Repay do an outstanding job, and no one but us seemed to notice him. The chances for a quick coup seemed to multiply before our eyes. Too enthused over our prospects to immure ourselves immediately in the hotel, we breakfasted idly at the club, and then reported again to the stables. It was a beautiful forenoon at the Pune racecourse, a day to laze now that the early work was done, and Dr. Lobo, a friendly chap who was one of the official turf club veterinarians, was sitting in Temul's yard. As we chatted, Dr. Lobo, who knew a little of Vimalananda's reputation, delivered up a challenge by saying that he doubted all the stories that people told him about yoga could be true. Vimalananda glanced at me, and I shrugged my eyebrows. Then Vimalananda asked Dr. Lobo to participate in an experiment. He asked the vet to feel his pulse, and while the man was holding his arm, Vimalananda went on and on about the many unusual things that happen here in India. The vet was a man with a dark complexion. When I saw his face become rapidly pallid, I knew Vimalananda must have stopped his heart. This being a tremendous strain on his body, I waited only a few seconds before wigwagging to him to quit. He took pity on me and complied, and as he continued on to chatter away cheerily, his pulse normalized and the color drained back into Dr. Lobo's face. In short order, the vet found some excuse to depart, and after he left, Vimalananda laughed in triumph. I objected perfunctly. Was the showing off really worth the exertion? He dismissed me with, "His reaction was priceless. It was worth it just to see how funky he became. Now he will not prattle on about what yogis can and cannot do." Racing in Pune was much more relaxed than racing in Bombay. For one thing, the track is not an island of green in a sea of skyscrapers. In Pune, broad tree-lined streets cluster about the racecourse, and in the east, the Empress Gardens offer a thickly arboreal vista. For another, Vimalananda, being an outsider in Pune, had only a few chums to chat with among the local racegoers. One of the more notable was Pune's premier Chinese dentist, Dr. Wang, who came like clockwork every week with his wife. We appreciated his occasional work on our teeth and would always smilingly offer whatever information we had, when he would smilingly ask which horse we favored. But the Wangs did not sit with us, for in Pune there are but two enclosures. The members come first, and the second. When Mr. Lafange had been our trainer, we sat just above the members' boxes, on benches which, though outfitted with green cushions, were benches nonetheless. With our switch to Temul, our status improved, for he had a friend whose box was almost never used. We now arrived in Pune racing scene, like royalty, circulating among commoners, and seated ourselves among the hoity-toity rather than the hoi polloi. To the right and below our box was the Indian gentleman who had married his European nurse. A bit further down, the Maharaja of Gwalior. Far in front perched the wanton Bapsi, who cuckolded her seemingly impotent husband Porus with whomever she could. The box to our immediate left was usually occupied by the face and the cigar of the delightful Maharaja of Mudal, our favourite among the racing gentry, with whom we spent many a pleasant evening over drinks and dinner after a rousing afternoon at the track. Perhaps the least aesthetic of all our new neighbours were the obese Mr. and Mrs. Kumar and their obese daughter. They wanted nothing to do with us poor folk, which made me qualmless about dubbing them the three little pigs. Mr. Kumar had a way of perpetually rejamming a gigantic cigar into his mouth, which wonderfully reinforced, like the apple wedged into the maw of a suckling pig destined for the oven, his own porciness. Even Vimalananda had to agree that they were three of the most hog-faced humans that he had ever seen. Rumor had it that they made most of their money in leather currency, which is a euphemism for the flesh trade. It was easy to believe this to be true of the cruel-mouthed Mrs. Kumar, a sow who looked hungry enough to cannibalize the runts from her litters. We enjoyed many a joke at the expense of the three pigs, but there is justice in the world, alas, and soon it became evident that Mr. Pig's beady little eyes had homed in on Repay. Kumar was no fool, and he could see that Taimur and Vimalananda were cooking up a masala for the first win of Repay's career. Kumar had access to vast sums of money, which he could drive Repay's odds down, with or without us. This made it a case of, do we want the porker inside the tent pissing out, or outside the tent pissing in? Taimur brokered an agreement, and Kumar did all the betting. When Repay scooted comfortably home in September, as a 7-1 outsider, I sat silently watching when Kumar arrived at the stables after the race, plunked down our share of the winnings, which was about $10,000, and left to tend to his other investments, or perhaps to dip his snout down into his dinner trough. His profit would have been at least 10 times as much. I opened my jaws after Kumar had departed. Repay did a pretty good job of repaying, didn't he? Why do you think I named him Repay? Replied my contented mentor. I knew that he had some sort of runanubandhana with me, that he would be able to amplify, requite his debt, to redeem his pledge. I had no fear of that. I was only uncertain of when it would happen. And you're not sorry Kumar got in on the deal? Not at all. Remember, always distribute your karmas. Sharing your good fortune creates patterns in karma. It spreads the karmas around, which reduces your own burden significantly. It is better to share your profits with good people, but if you can't have good people, then use whoever God sends to you, within reason. Back at the hotel, redemption continued to occupy his mind. We have been talking casually about repaying and redemption, but do you know what a serious matter it is to redeem? Probably the best blessing, the best gift of all, is the gift of fearlessness. When you give fearlessness, you can tell that person, look, you must endure your karmas yourself, but I can give you the courage to endure them. In fact, there used to be a sadhu in Girnar named Abhyanada, meaning bliss of fearlessness, who was ready to give fearlessness to anyone. He didn't last long though. How could he? Such behavior interferes with the divine plan. Fearlessness is a great gift, but it is not redemption. To redeem is to say, I will bear your karmas for you. That is the highest. Very few can do this, or even want to do it. Ramakrishna Paramahasa, who was a great saint, only took on someone's karmas onto himself in 3 cases. Only 3 and no more. No, in all history, there has only been one Redeemer, my Jesus. And he had to pay very dearly for taking on all those karmas. He had to be crucified. A few years ago, the Pope came to Bombay. Imagine that. I went with Roshni's mother to see what would happen. There was a mammoth crowd. The Pope drove up in a Mercedes, got out, raised his arms and said, "Repeat after me. That which should have been done by me has not been done by me. That which should not have been done by me has been done by me." We all repeated. Then he said, "By the power of the Holy See, I absolve you of all your sins." Roshni's mother was very impressed by this drama. But does the Pope really think that it is so easy to absolve everyone's bad karmas? When Jesus tried to do the same thing for the Jews, he died a most terrible death. This sort of painless absolution of sins is all a delusion, and, of course, is the infallibility of the Pope. Were the popes who ordered the Crusades or the Inquisition infallible? Or the ones who ordered young boys to be castrated just because the church wanted some sopranos? Was any of this Jesus' idea? I think not. Jesus was the one who could say, "Come unto me." He was the only one who could ever say, "Come, I will suffer for your sins. Forget them and live a new life." One look from those eyes of his and you melt completely. All Rajasic and Tamasic qualities gone. These Christians harp on sin, 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 and by teaching sin, they perpetuate it. They've forgotten the teachings of Jesus. Jesus said, "Forget your sins. Give them to me and I will wipe the slate clean." You start over and never return to them. And what agonies he had to endure for taking so many karmas on to himself, my God! But he endured them willingly. Not even Krishna did what Jesus did, and that is why I will ever love Jesus. He was the real thing. Rajas and Tamas represent respectively an over-willingness to act and an under-willingness to act. Should both these tendencies disappear from the mind, nothing would remain but the state of quiescent clarity known as sattva. I too love Jesus dearly, and my own emotions rose to my eyes as I watched the image of his smiling face coalesce in my mind. How deep was his clarity to sustain him throughout his ordeal? I asked, didn't Jesus also die on the cross to teach us to bear each other's karmas in the same way that he bore ours, even to a reduced degree? After all, if you love your neighbor as you love yourself, and if everyone is really an emanation of God, then you are ultimately me. And when I take on your karmas, I am effectively saving myself. That is precisely what so many great Christian saints have done. They have worshipped Jesus by giving back to him the gift that he gave to us, the gift of compassion. It's so wonderful. Jesus could create such a marvelous play, such an unprecedented Leela, because he was the emanation of a certain rishi. All the avatars of Vishnu, like Rama and Krishna, emanated from rishis. In fact, Jesus and Krishna emanated from the same rishi. But look at the difference in their play. Krishna was Gopala, the protector of the cows. Gopala also means he who restrains his senses, and this is what Krishna taught to his devotees. Jesus, on the other hand, was the good shepherd. Does this mean that if Krishna was the Gopala, Jesus was the Meshpala, the protector of the sheep? Yes, I suppose so, he laughed, momentarily nonplussed. A rare pleasure. My bon mot had struck home. Then he shot back. But why shepherd? Because of the sheep mentality of most people. Like sheep, people easily become lost in the wilderness of the world. That's why they need protection. Jesus is prepared to go out into the wilderness to save those sheep, to search for them until he finds them and carries them home with him. This is why there is no need for intelligence in Jesus' religion, which is of pure love. In fact, you can hamper your progress in your sadhana of Jesus if you use your intelligence. You simply have to be ready to follow wherever Jesus leads you, in perfect faith that as long as you follow him, you can never go astray. The main difficulty with everyone is that they have no faith. Jesus used to complain about this all the time. One way in which animals are better than humans is that they have no conscious self-interest. They do not anguish all the time about what happened in the past, what is yet to come. Humans forget that God is doing everything for us already, so there is no need to prepare anything. It is only because of our ill fate that any of us worry. If we didn't worry, we would be perennially happy, for we would accept whatever God chose to offer us according to our karmas. But the weight of our karmas interferes with our happiness. It causes us to plan and anticipate, and to experience anxiety and worry. Look at how we planned Repay's run and worried over its outcome, when we could have just relaxed and let God do His work. This is why a saint is the only truly happy person. A real saint has gone beyond worry. Here is a question for you. Millions of people bathe in the eternal river Ganga every day. All the authorities, the saints, the holy books, say that bathing in the Ganga washes away all evil karmas. If this is true, why hasn't everyone who bathes in the Ganga become enlightened by now, since you become enlightened when your karmic burden is lightened? Good question. I don't think I know why. Well, let's assume that you bathe in the Ganga and come out perfectly clean of karma. But as soon as you step out of the riverbank, you start to perform new karmas again. Voila! There you are, right back in the soup. Which is why there is no escape from the law of karma until you change your consciousness. Though we humans imagine that we are in charge of our destinies, fate is far more complicated than you can ever imagine. He settled back with his scotch while ghazals emanated from a well-worn recording of the famous vocalist Begum Akhtar, and began again. Even rishis can be bewildered by fate. Consider the case of Parashara Rishi, who was an authority on Jyotish, a subject which is nothing more or nor less than the knowledge of the play of the 9 planets. One day, as Parashara walked through a fishing village on the river Yamuna, a realization struck him like a flash of lightning. He saw that a child conceived at a precise instant on that day would become one of the greatest sages and a redactor of the Vedas. A rishi can give birth to thousands of beings simply by wiping the sweat off his forehead. But fate perverted Parashara's mind. He decided instead that he should enjoy sex with a girl himself and father a child through copulation. That this would cause him to lose the fruits of centuries of his penance did not occur to him at the time. As fate would have it, a beautiful young fish girl named Matyas Gandha, meaning fishy odor, was standing nearby. She was not an ordinary girl. Her father was a king, and her mother was a celestial damsel who had taken the form of a fish as a result of a curse. She was called Matsyagandha because her body smelled fishy. Only to be expected if your mother was a fish. But I read that her real name was Satyavati. Maybe so, but I call her Matsyagandha. Parashara hailed her and explained his plan without any hesitation. Back then, people were not as embarrassed about such things as they are today. The girl readily agreed to his proposal, thinking, "To become the mother of a rishi's child is a rare blessing." But she told him, "It would not be good to enjoy sex right here in the village. Let us go out into the water." So they got into a boat and went out into the middle of the water, where Parashara created an island for their love-making. Then, when Parashara approached her, she said. "The sun is witnessing our play. Please request him to turn away." So darkness fell at the precise moment when the child had to be conceived. After their love play was over, Parashahara was pleased and granted Matsyagandha the boon of permanent body fragrance. Thereafter, she was called Yojana Gandha, meaning she whose fragrance can be smelled at a distance of 8 miles. The child who was born the same day that he was conceived was Krishna, meaning dark-complexioned due to the darkness of his conception. Dvayapayana, meaning born on an island, and Vyasa, the compiler, who is commonly known as Veda Vyasa, or Veda arranger. Besides reworking the Vedas, Vyasa composed a number of literary masterpieces, including the great epic more than 100,000 verses known as the Mahabharata, and the sublime story of Lord Krishna, that is, the Srimad-Bhagavata. If Vyasa had never been born, none of these stories would have ever appeared in our world. But isn't there something strange about all this? I drew a blank. Why did he ever get the idea to write these stories down? Does a rishi have any use for the written word? None whatsoever. He always prefers to use paravani, telepathic speech. But Vyasa was the son of a Shudra girl. Shudras are mired in the awareness of the physical. It's natural. They have to toil hard to earn a living, and their minds focus on their toil. The only reason that the thought of a physical representation of his knowledge even entered Vyasa's mind was this mundane influence on his intellect. Vyasa was born as he was because nature wanted that all this should be written down for the benefit of those of us who live in Kali Yuga. Parashahara's intellect was perverted precisely because nature needed the offspring of a Brahmana and a Shudra to redact the Vedas and create the Mahabharata and the Srimad-Bhagavata. Isn't nature wonderful? This is another reason why the caste system is no longer applicable in its original form. Even today, no orthodox Brahmana will accept into his family any son of a Brahmana father and a Shudra mother, but that was Vyasa's parentage. And what he accomplished, no other Brahmana could accomplish. Does this make him better or worse than an orthodox Brahmana? Neither. He is what he is, a distinguished immortal. Vyasa was once asked to father children on 2 princesses. He agreed, and like his father before him, decided to use sexual intercourse instead of some other method to fulfill his commitment. Why did he prefer physical sex? Because his consciousness was affected, even if minimally, by the fact that he had been born as a result of a sexual act. Look at how deep and long-lasting the effects of sexual karma can be. Unfortunately, Vyasa's preference for sex created some unintended karmas of their own. The first princess was so terrified by Vyasa's imposing demeanor that she paled when he embraced her. This caused Pandu, her son, to be born pale. The second couldn't endure Vyasa's intense aura and closed her eyes, which caused her son Dhritarashtra to be born blind. Was it that simple? It is that simple when you're dealing with a rishi. A woman takes a man's Shakti when he ejaculates into her, and nourishes that Shakti with her own Shakti to create a child. When the woman and the man have more or less equal Shaktis, as they usually do when they're both humans, their Shaktis will have more or less equal influence on the child that results. But a rishi is not a human. A rishi is a super duper who has super Shakti. and only a similar woman will be able to unite with him as an equal. Any human woman who tries to unite with him will function mainly as the mold into which he pours his Shakti. If the woman doesn't open herself to him completely, the Rishi's Shakti will not penetrate her evenly. The mold will thus not be completely filled, and wherever the Shakti doesn't reach, there will be a deficiency in the child. Okay. The first princess was then requested to return to the Rishi for another try at producing a healthy crown prince. But she wanted no more of that, so she secretly sent her servant girl instead. That girl had no inhibitions and was so pleased that she was going to enjoy sex with a Rishi that she surrendered herself completely to him. Through her surrender, some fragment of Vyasa's super qualities were transmitted through her into the fetus, who became her son Vidura. These qualities made Vidura clairvoyant from birth. "Let me get something straight," I interrupted. "The Mahabharata war was fought between the 5 sons of Pandu and the 100 sons of Dhritarashtra, which means that it was actually fought between 2 sets of grandsons of Vyasa." "Precisely." My, a civil war that was really all in the family. No wonder Vyasa had to write the Mahabharata. It was family history. "Yes, but there's more. One of Pandu's 5 sons was Yudhishthira. Another was Arjuna, the great warrior who was Lord Krishna's great friend. Arjuna sired Abhimanyu out of Subhadra, Krishna's sister, and Abhimanyu died in the war because Arjuna had stolen Subhadra. But before his death, Abhimanyu had impregnated his wife Uttara with Parikshit, and it is thanks to King Parikshit that we have the Srimad-Bhagavata. The Srimad-Bhagavata was transmitted to Parikshit by the Sutta, who had heard it from the great Rishi Shukadeva, who heard it from his father Vyasu. Shukadeva being yet another of Vyasa's children. He was the most amazing of Vyasa's children, for he was not born from a womb. He escaped the taint of copulation by springing instead from the rubbing of the arani, the sticks used to create fire for Vedic sacrifices. This is why he is called Arani Putra, meaning son of the Arani. Because Shukadeva was not born as the result of sex, he did not discriminate according to gender. Celestial damsels would throng to him as he roamed naked in the jungle. They would feel completely relaxed with him because he never showed the slightest trace of awareness of their sexual identity. But if Vyasa approached, the women would quickly hide, for they could feel that he saw them in a different way. Even though he was also pure-minded? Yes, even though he never lusted after them, Vyasa's awareness was ever so slightly sexual because of his birth. That was enough to make a difference. Vyasa created the Srimad-Bhagavata for his own pleasure and for the pleasure of his son Shukadeva. He might never have released it to the world had he not wanted King Parikshit to obtain moksha, which is liberation, by hearing it. Parikshit had been cursed by a rishi to die by being bitten by a snake. As the king listened to the sutta recite the Srimad-Bhagavata for 7 days, Parikshit released his attachments to the world and welcomed death when it arrived. Why would Vyasa want Parikshit to obtain moksha? Why wouldn't he? He wanted to wind up the karmas of that branch of his family, and what better way to do it than arrange for his great-great-grandson's liberation? How would that help the family? Haven't you been paying attention? If you can help yourself out by doing piritarpana for your ancestors, you can help your ancestors out even more by becoming liberated. It's the same sort of thing. Are you saying that Vyasa released the Srimad-Bhagavata into the world just to save his great-great-grandson and to improve his family's karmic pedigree? That was his immediate purpose, but by doing so he also ensured that it would be handed down to posterity. How did that happen? The Sutta, who was present when Shukadeva recited it to Parikshit, later retold the Srimad-Bhagavata to a group of sages who had assembled in the Nayamsharanya. These sages and their disciples were responsible for introducing the Srimad-Bhagavata to the rest of the world. You should only read or listen to the Srimad-Bhagavata when you are ready to abandon, temporarily or permanently, the mundane outside world, as those sages who had withdrawn from the world into Nayamsharanya did. Though the Nayamsharanya is a forest in North India, some writers have proposed that the word also be read as the forest, meaning Aranya, of blinking, Nayamsha, which would refer to the inside of the human body. A sojourn in the Nayamsharanya would then imply a turning inward of the normally outward pointed senses to heighten awareness of the inner cosmos. And like Parikshit, Vimalananda continued, you must cultivate your interiority if you hope to enter into the inner astral world of the Srimad-Bhagavata. What does Parikshit mean? Tested. Technically speaking, Parikshit means surrounding, extending, as heaven and earth extend out to surround us. But I knew that Vimalananda was thinking of the word parikshita, which means tested. Exactly. Only when a disciple is completely tested is he eligible to be taught. You should understand from his name that King Parikshit had gone through the grind. He had become thoroughly prepared for the knowledge that was given him. Anyone who wants to get the real juice out of the Srimad-Bhagavata needs to be prepared to self-identify with King Parikshit when they listen to it. When you hear it, you need to be able to temporarily become Parikshit, which you will only be able to do if you have been painstakingly tested. So King Parikshit was delivered this wisdom via the Sutta? I thought Sutta was just a word that means sun. Sutta does mean sun, but it also means that metal mercury. A woman after delivery, a charioteer. It has so many meanings. Because it is a Sanskrit word, all these meanings must be related. You are a student of Sanskrit. You tell me what these things have in common. Well, I was stuck. They are all carriers. They transport essence around in the world until it reaches the point where it can manifest. Think it over. They deliver things? They represent the cosmic courier service? Yes, they deliver. The Sutta's father was the charioteer Romaharshana, who was personally killed by Lord Krishna, seemingly by mistake, but in fact as a blessing. How was that? Have you ever heard that the father lives on through the son? Yes. A child transports the essence of its parents, their genes and chromosomes. Romaharshana was not pure enough to act as a fit vehicle for the Srimad-Bhagavata, but when Krishna killed him, he purified him. This made Romaharshana's son pure enough to deliver the Srimad-Bhagavata to the world. Romaharshana must have already been quite an advanced soul, Otherwise, he would not have been fit to be killed and purified by Krishna himself. But he was not quite pure enough. What does Romaharshana mean in Sanskrit? Horripilation, goose flesh, the body hairs stand on end, which is caused by cold, fear, or some other strong stimulation, including spiritual experiences. Romaharshana was highly evolved, but not quite evolved enough to transport this particular Shakti. Did Lord Krishna's act of killing Romaharshana serve as a sort of Pitri Tarpana for Romaharshana's family? Yes, if you want to look at it that way. Well, Romaharshana's death paved the way for the transmission of the Srimad-Bhagavata, which has benefited millions of people. Some of those benefited are bound to bless it and its writers, and some percentage of those blessings are bound to flow to those who arranged to transport it to us, no? Sort of an ongoing astral royal payment? I think we can be confident that the Srimad-Bhagavata has enormously benefited everyone who was involved in bringing it to light in our world, and all their ancestors too. It particularly benefited Parashara, who, by siring Vyasa, made it all possible. And Parashara certainly needed some benefit to help counteract the karma that he incurred by inseminating Matsyagandha. While it was very good for the world that Vyasa was born, it did not do Parashara much good to have enjoyed sex with a Shudra. That act entangled him in the play of her karmas, which were of a pattern quite different from his. These karmas forced Parashara to take birth again, to experience the repercussions of this act. Every taint, and especially that of copulation, must be erased. Is copulation such a big taint, then? Do you remember that you once asked me about a certain Vedic sacrifice in which beer is brewed? Months had passed, but he had not forgotten. Yes, the Sautarmani sacrifice. I had asked you why the ritual text specifies that the barley from which the beer will be brewed must be taken from a eunuch. Here is your answer. The rishi who created the sacrifice intended the barley to be collected from someone who is a born eunuch, not from a eunuch who has been cut. A natural eunuch has not even been exposed to the energy of sex, much less the experience of copulation. Such a person has the potential to be the living embodiment of the Nirvikara Tattva, which is the principle of the formless, because what is sex about if not the creation of new forms? But even a natural eunuch has only the potential to embody formless. Didn't the rishis expect the sacrificer to locate someone who had realized this formless potential, and not just find any old barley donating natural eunuch? Exactly. Our rishis were not fools. What possible use would an ordinary eunuch have been to them? The essence is what counts, not the outer garb. Is this the sort of thing that Jesus was talking about when he talked about someone who makes himself a eunuch for the kingdom of heaven's sake? I was thinking of Matthew 19:12. Yes, the same sort of thing. And remember that in this context, Jesus says that this is not for everyone, but only for those who properly understand it. Maybe for those who have ears to hear and eyes to see. Oh, so the copulation taint was strong enough to force Parashara to take birth yet again? It was. Unfortunately, Parashara's personality in his new body was rather dull. His father tried to teach him many things, but he failed. Exasperated, he asked his son, Why can't you learn anything I try to teach you?" The boy answered, "I don't know, father. I suppose it must be due to my past karmas." The father got wild on hearing this from his dull-witted son and told him, "You better get out of here and go do Gayatri." So the boy went out into the forest. Here the father's intellect had become perverted. How could the boy help it if his past karmas were bad? And what father would begrudge his own son his past faults? Parents are there to forgive, not to curse. But without this order from his father, the boy would not have succeeded so quickly. His father probably did not know it, but it was important for Parashahara to do sadhana of the sun. Why? Because Parashahara had deliberately sent the sun away on that fateful day when he had impregnated Matsyagandha. So even that was a karma? A big karma. You have to be very careful when you play about with the 9 planets. The boy found himself a good spot and made a hammock of 12 stout ropes made of creepers, braced with 3 cross ropes. He strung his hammock between 2 trees and sat on it, with a fire beneath him, repeating the Gayatri mantra. Every year he cut one of the ropes, so that after 11 years he was balancing on a single strand. When the 12 years were almost up, he said to himself, "If I don't succeed at perfecting this mantra and obtaining a vision of the sun god at the end of these 12 years, there will be nothing to do but put an end to myself." But deities are not cruel. They are really very kind. On the last day of his penance, he saw a sadhu approaching him. The sadhu had an unworldly, effulgent glow about him, and the boy realized that the sun himself, Surya Narayana, had come to him in human form. He bowed to the sadhu, and Lord Surya said to him, "So, my boy, what do you want?" The boy asked for proficiency in astrology. Why would he ask for this? Both because of his previous expertise in astrology as Parashahara, that influence was beginning to re-exert itself, and because who better than the sun to teach astrology? Lord Surya then blessed him, saying, "Your name will last as long as the sun and moon exist as the greatest ever expert in astrology." Then he disappeared, and the boy left his place of penance. When he reached his home, his remorse-filled father recognized him and tearfully said, "I don't care if you are a dud or not. Please come and embrace me." When the boy responded with a beautiful Sanskrit verse, his father realized that yes, he had indeed been doing Gayatri this whole time, for Gayatri is the mother of Sanskrit. Over the course of time, this boy, now called Mirichararya, in honor of his penance — Mihiri is one of the names of the sun — became a gem at the king's court. When the king's son was born, the court astrologers were directed to predict his fate. All except Mihira said that he would live long, rule wisely, and enjoy his glory. Mihira alone said, "This boy will die at age 3, on such and such day, at this exact moment, gored to death by a varaha," meaning a wild boar. The king said, "Please, Mihira, everyone else had said something good. Kindly change your prediction." Mihira replied, "I'm so sorry, O king, but it will happen as I have said. This is fate." The king built a 7-story building and put his son at the top floor, surrounded by a strong guard, so that no boar could get to him. When the appointed day arrived, the king and all jealous courtiers were waiting to see Mihira proved wrong and then punished. Exactly at the given moment, the flagstaff on the 7th story of the building broke and fell on top of the little boy, who happened to be playing below it. Atop the flagpole sat the king's symbol, which was a boar's head made of solid gold and weighing more than 80 pounds. When this image landed on the child, one of its golden tusks pierced its chest, and he died instantly. Mihira said to the shocked king, "O king, the boar has killed the boy, as I predicted." The grieving king replied, "You are the wisest of my astrologers. In honor of this brilliant prediction, I now name you Varaha, meaning boar. Mihira Varaha." Mihira went on to write many well-known treatises on astrology. His system follows Parashahara's system, though with only a few principles changed here and there. As it should, after all. He had only recently been Parashahara. But even Varaha Mihira did not realize the significance of his words when he spoke of fate. Fate is so powerful that even things which seem impossible become possible if they are meant to be. And even stronger than fate is God. As they say in Hindi, Khuda Mehban Tugadi Bhi Palhawan. If God is gracious, even a donkey can become a wrestler. Even Jendu Kumar? Quit baiting me. Yes, even Jendu Kumar. But if and only if God went along with his schemes. But God is not going to do that, so you can forget about it. And so can he. At least God was kind enough to let Repay finally repay you. Nature is very kind to me, Robbie. That's all I can tell you. That nature is very kind to me. There is absolutely nothing that God cannot do. I've seen it over and over again in my life. This is why I pray day and night for more bhakti, because I know that if my devotion is truly sincere, God will provide me with whatever it is I need. After my final grueling round of university exams in the fall of 1979, I proceeded to Bombay and watched Repay continue to win there during the early months of 1980. Around this time, Vimalananda bought Onslaught, a reliable Class 1 horse from Bomban, Estonia. Though Onslaught had never won for Bomban, he did for Vimalananda, and it began to seem that all our horses were doing well. Even Bhadrangi, the last horse Vimalananda had purchased when he kept his string with Lafange. In one of his more egregious transactions, Lafange had insisted that Vimalananda purchase this horse, and Vimalananda had regretted his acquisition ever since. "For one thing," he would say, "his color is liver chestnut, and everyone knows that liver chestnuts rarely keep good health." In Bhadrangi's case, at least, this was true. Jockeys would complain that when they sat on him, he would try to move his back out from under them as if they were causing him pain. No one could discover any obvious pathology or do him any good, not even Dr. Singh, the eccentric vet who sought to provide his expertise at equine massage by flaunting it as his copy of Turaga Samhita, a Sanskrit treatise on horses. I, meanwhile, had been studying Ayurvedic herbology at college, and I came one morning to Vimalananda with a proposal that we try on Bhadrangi, a local preparation of bhalataka, an extremely poisonous fruit which, when appropriately manufactured, often shows good results in such varied afflictions as goiter, paralysis, and infertility. At his wits' end over Bhadrangi, Vimalananda agreed, and being dutiful experimenters, he and I decided to try some of this restorative as well, just to see what it would do. The horse got 2 tablespoons, and Vimalananda and I took half teaspoon each. The medication, which in fact had not been properly prepared, gave the horse extreme colic, and us two humans extreme skin rashes. At least Taimur could report that Bajrangi, who luckily survived, became significantly more spirited afterward than he had been before this medicine, though he was still uneasy when mounted. Vimalananda and I also noticed vastly improved zest and energy. Vimalananda's skin being darker than mine, his rash disappeared a mere 2 or 3 days after he began to ingest the antidote. A Bhalataka reaction is always more severe in a white-skinned individual though, and even when with the antidote, it took a full 2 weeks for my skin color to fade from bright pink back to normal. Everyone at the college thought I had been fiercely sunburned, and it was just the effects of the urishol, the poison in Bhalataka, which is also the poison in poison ivy, poison oak, poison sumac, cashew shells, mango skins, and Chinese lacquer. It was a poison ivy rash, but from the inside out, which meant I felt the intense itching about an inch below the surface of my skin. It, like the pinkness, gradually faded with the antidote, but it cost me a couple of sleepless nights of vain attempts to scratch it. Thank God we knew what was the main ingredient in this concoction, said Vimalananda to me, once it became clear that my reaction would indeed disappear. I once treated a woman who had been secretly given Bhalataka. No ordinary remedy could give her any relief, because no one had suspected the truth. She suffered for more than 2 years from its poison before she came to me and got the specific antidote. Bajrangi was a real preoccupation during much of 1979, and by the spring of 1980, we were ready to throw in the towel on him when entered the enterprising Dr. Martanda. He happened to drive to the stables one afternoon. We escorted the doctor from stall to stall, introducing him to Vimalananda's 4-legged children, until we reached Bajrangi, where we recounted our woes in full. "What?" said the doctor. "Such a minor thing, and no one has been able to deal with it? It is obvious he lacks marrow in the bones of his back. Since the marrow tissue is the foundation of Shukra, he must have had a deficiency of sperms, which has kept his vitality low." Great, I thought. Repay couldn't get enough of his own sperm, and Bajrangi doesn't have enough to go around. "I can cure him," said Dr. Martanda, "with just 2 doses of medicine. All you have to do after I dose him is to feed him the soup made from 1 dozen goat thigh bones, and I can guarantee a cure." "Dr. Saab," said Vimalananda smoothly, "horses have no gallbladders, and feeding him something as fatty as marrow soup will give him colic. That will kill him." "Don't worry yourself in the least," replied the ever theatrical Dr. Martand. "I guarantee that no harm will come to him." Vimalananda and I looked at one another until at last he said to me, "What do we have to lose?" Though Taimur was not pleased with this proposal at all, he agreed to permit the doctor to try his potion, for he realized that if anything untoward did happen, we would at least be able to collect on Bajrangi's insurance money. The groom was therefore ordered to proceed to the market and buy the appropriate bones. The next morning Dr. Martanda arrived at the stables promptly after the morning work to administer the first dose, Taimur standing by expecting calamity at any minute. But Bajrangi showed complications neither that day or the next, and the next jockey to mount him testified that the horse was no longer doing his previous dance. The goat marrow had presumably filled his bones, for his track work improved weekly. The day that he actually ran a race was one of the highlights of our season. Vimalananda laid no wager on this horse, who had let us down so often in the past, but we were just happy to see him out competing with his fellows on the grass. After running once or twice more, Bajrangi still showed no signs of wanting to win, so we disposed of him. After the fact, Vimalananda questioned the wisdom of his decision to name our sperm-deficient horse Bajrangi, which is the Hindi version of one of the Sanskrit names of Angina. He had hoped in vain that carrying such a name would make him want to live up to that standard of his namesake and run well. Now, Vimalananda speculated that the opposite might have been the case. It is always good to name your child after God. That's how Ajmila was saved, do you recall? When death came for him, he called for his son Narayana, but got through to Lord Vishnu, Lord Narayana himself. I had no intention of commercializing Anjaniya's name when I named my horse Bajrangi, but it is possible that it might have seemed that way to the law of karma, since he was racing for money. This might in fact have been one of the factors that prevented his progress. It is so difficult to know the law of karma in detail, and impossible to know its entirety. Completely impossible, even for the rishis. It didn't seem like a bad idea to me at the time because Anjaniya has helped me advance my career in the past. During my salad days as a pro wrestler, it was the power of Anjaniya that sustained me. Could I ever have done it on my own? Ha! Anjaniya, who has from his birth been the patron deity of wrestlers, continued to sustain Vimalananda even in my era, when he would challenge my arm wrestling to the young Maharashtrian wrestlers who used to come to him to get his blessing for an upcoming bout. Invariably, the heart patient in his mid-60s would easily defeat the youthful musclemen, and when they would shamefacedly admit defeat, he would tell them, "Don't worry, my boy. Which human can withstand the power of Anjaniya? Remember this when you return to your village. Don't forget to pay your regards to the temple of Anjaniya there, a temple whose new image had been purchased by that very Dr. Martanda, who had treated Anjaniya's equine namesake. The Ayurvedic internship program at the Tarchand Ramanath Charitable Ayurvedic Hospital depleted my 1980 spring and summer. Aside from the odd weekend in Bombay, I could meet Vimalananda only when he came to Pune to pay his visits to his four-legged friends. A few of my instructors made regular pilgrimages to his hotel during his stays, hoping to mop up their own practices, the odd treatment tip that Vimalananda would occasionally spill. They were intrigued with his knowledge of herbs and minerals, and with his ability to diagnose people by taking his own pulse. He was intrigued with the possibility that he might somehow get some of them to think originally for a change. Aside from Dr. Vasant Lad, though, few of these physicians impressed him. Vimalananda, who appreciated Dr. Lad's devotion to his guru Hambir Baba and his personal deity Ganesha, who's the elephant-headed remover of obstacles, assisted him and his family in various ways. This favoritism made some of the other faculty members, who regarded Dr. Lad's station in life as being beneath theirs, determined to take from Vimalananda the assistance that they felt they deserved. As these men had no deep interest in Ayurveda, Jyotish, Tantra, or any other form of classical Indian wisdom, Vimalananda protected himself creatively from them. For example, after Dr. Paduke brought his father to Vimalananda one day to ask his help in reversing a chronic intestinal infirmity, Vimalananda said, "Oh, it can be fixed all right. I can guarantee it. But If it is, he will lose all his money. Which will it be? Health without wealth, or wealth without health? After they left, Vimalananda confidently predicted that he would never see them again, and he never did. The crassness of the bulk of these doctors disappointed Vimalananda acutely. He expected that anyone who had been blessed with the opportunity to imbibe Sanskrit learning ought to evince the same broadness of mind, quickness of wit, and keenness of awareness that seemed to come effortlessly to him. A lack of art, grace, and culture in otherwise knowledgeable men and women always seemed to disgruntle him. In 1980, he responded to the only invitation he ever received from my college with an address to its staff that went something like this: "It is no surprise that no one wants to learn Ayurveda nowadays, since no one is teaching the real meat of Ayurveda. If you really want your students to understand Ayurveda, you must teach them that there are only 4 things in medicine: dukkha, dukkha ka karana, karana ka upaya, or upaya ka anta, meaning misery, the cause of misery, the remedy for the cause, and the end of the remedy." As Ayurvedic physicians, we want to liberate our patients mostly from physical sorrow. This means that we must be fully conversant with the structures in which diseases develop. The dhatus, meaning tissues, the malas, meaning wastes. Teach your students why diagnosis of disease is usually by mala. The wastes are produced during the metabolic processes which produce the tissues, which means that if you know the malas, you will know the dhatus. Unfortunately, you people overlook many of the malas, like dandruff. Even examination of dandruff can yield significant information, in particular about the bones, given that head hair is an upadhatu, meaning secondary tissue of bone. In a way, the bones are a bridge between the astral body, which is the mind, and the physical body. Bone is governed by Vayu, which is the air element, which also appears in the body as prana. What controls prana controls the mind, and vice versa. Also, as a tissue, bone is the foundation of marrow, which is the foundation of shukra, which is the foundation of ojas, which is the foundation of health. Know dandruff in detail and you can know the patient's health. If you want good health, you must nourish your tissues well, which means you must nourish the tastes in your body. When you lack taste, your metabolism is affected. Even if you lay a big meal before a sick man, he will not be interested. His taste is not there. Lack of taste within the body causes a patient of jaundice to lack appetite. Disturbance of the inner taste process causes the appetite to be lost in fever. Ayurveda is the only medical system which describes medicines for supplying to the body the tastes which it lacks. Teach your students that. Actually, all the tastes are inside, but we look for them outside in our food. Our job as physicians is to create the proper taste within a sick person so that proper tissue nourishment will resume and natural immunity in the form of ojas will increase. This is why we use medicines, not just to suppress disease like the allopaths do, but to return the patient's balance to normal. Your great Ayurvedic author, Charaka, learned about medicinal herbs by watching what animals ate when they were sick. Students should learn in the same way. You should teach them how to make the plant talk to you, how to make it tell you These are my qualities, my tastes, and my useful parts, and I am useful in this disease. Those who really know Ayurveda know that every plant has 1,000 uses. Teach your students why we like to use plants for our medicines. Plants and animals complement one another nicely. Plants breathe in carbon dioxide and breathe out oxygen, while animals exhale carbon dioxide and inhale oxygen. Teach them all the details of how to collect medicinal plants. When you inform them that plants should never be collected at night, tell them the reason why. Plants breathe at night, and if you collect them, then it is like strangling them. If you strangle the plant, do you think it will be interested in trying to help you to help your patient? Teach your pupils how one plant antidotes another. Teach them the secret uses of Apamarga, Tulsi, and Bilva, plants which can make you clairaudient and clairvoyant. Teach them the limitations of herbs and why we also use medicines made from minerals. Above all, teach them the real meaning of Rasayana, which means rejuvenation, literally the path of rasa. Because it is only through rasa, taste, juice, emotion, that rejuvenation can occur. All the assembled physicians nodded sagaciously and thanked him for his comments. But when we were alone again, Vimalananda shook his head with resignation and said, "Is it any wonder that Ayurveda is in such a desperate state today? Your professors seem to be good people by and large, but most of them simply do not know Ayurveda. So how do they think they are going to teach it? They don't even know the simplest things about Ayurveda, such as how to develop your body. What is the use in knowing about Ayurveda if you can't even develop your body?" A wrestler was talking. I asked, "What method do you like best for body development?" He replied, "It depends on the individual. Bhang works well for many people. Wrestlers who live in Benares have made a science of how to use bhang as part of their training regimen. After their morning workout, they will bathe in the Ganga, get a 2-hour massage, bathe again, eat well, and take a nap. On arising, they will defecate to lighten their bodies and minds, then bathe again, then get yet another massage, then take bhang. They eat when the intoxication of the bhang is at its height. Try it. Your body will develop amazingly." We do not expect, though, that bhang like this is going to help them free Kundalini from its constraints. How could it? In fact, it will make Ahamkara identify even more firmly with the body. But you have to decide what you want to do with your life. Only then can Ayurveda help you. If you want to go the way of awakening Kundalini, using bhang, then you have to use it another way, which I am sure that your professors are also unaware of. Do they have any idea of the real way to perform rejuvenation? Do they know that while herbs can make you live 400 to 500 years, you can go on almost indefinitely if you know how to use mercury? Do they know that you can extract copper from peacock feathers and mercury from bilva leaves? Or that alchemical gold shows different results from mined gold when seen in the mass spectrometer? They teach chemistry at your college, but do they know anything at all of the real Rasa Sastra, which is alchemy? Have they ever heard, much less seen, the many ways to solidify mercury? Or the few ways in which you can make mercury Agni Staya, which is a fire fast, so that it will not melt when placed into a fire? The true alchemy, my boy, is not even easy to understand, much less do. I wonder how many of your instructors are even interested in understanding it. One way in which I am different from most doctors is that most doctors, not all but most, see sick people as money-making projects. I look at them with Smashantara's eyes instead, and see them as my own children. When I can help someone escape from a disease, I feel as if I've helped cure my own son or daughter. I love to do that, but I don't want anyone to know how I'm doing it. Why should they know? If they're sick, they should be interested in the result, not the process. If they're doctors, I don't want them to know how I do things. If they learn, they will just go out and commercialize my knowledge. They will use it to earn money from sick people. Besides, can they ever know how many days and weeks of hard work it took me to learn what I know? This is why I always like to try out new methods of treatment, so that no one will be able to pinpoint exactly what I'm doing. During one period of my life, I used to give an ounce of castor oil to every sick person who came my way. No one had any reaction or got diarrhea from it. On the contrary, everyone got some relief from the ailment they had brought to me. One lady who watched me do this to various people decided to be smart. She tried to do the same thing herself, but none of her patients ever responded. In fact, they invariably got worse. Then she came to me and demanded to know why this was happening. I asked her in response, "Who told you to do this?" Then, what did she say? Nothing. What is she going to say? Obviously, I said, something other than castor oil was doing the trick. Obviously, he echoed. In fact, it was something ethereal, something that used the castor oil as a medium through which to exert its effect. Castor oil is itself a wonderful medicine, but this ethereal thing could have used any medium. One day my friend Baram was suffering from intestinal colic. To help him, I picked up the first bottle I could reach on the shelf and gave him 2 pills from it. The pain disappeared. When I was out of Bombay a few weeks later, the pain recurred, and Baram looked for the bottle to dose himself again. This time he looked at the label and discovered it was hormonal preparation meant for regulating his wife's menses. He flew into such a rage that he threw the bottle out the window. He must have had some choice words for you when you got back. He always had choice words for me, but then I always fired him too. That's the way our friendship was. To be fired in Indian English is to be chewed out, dressed down, or similarly raked over the coals. You know, Faram's wife suffered for years with excessive menstrual bleeding. She would bleed for 20 days out of the month. She tried everything, but got no relief. Finally, she came to me one day and said, "Look, I've had enough. I just can't stand it anymore. I'm going to go and get a hysterectomy." I told her, "All you want to do is stop the flow, isn't it? Then why do you worry? Drink this water." And I handed her a full glass. She drank it, and her menses stopped from that day onwards. Whenever I look at a woman, I see Ma, and can't bear to see Ma in pain. One day, when I was at a friend's house, I heard moaning from the next room. I asked him what the problem was, and he said, "Oh, it's my sister. She's been in labor for the whole day, and there's been no progress so far. I'm not sure whether we'll need to go to do a cesarean or what." I told him, "Give me a shiny metal tray, one of those German silver ones you are so fond of." I traced a yantra on it with my finger. He asked me what I thought I was doing, because he couldn't see anything on the tray. I ignored him and went into the room where the girl was lying on the bed. I showed her the tray. She couldn't see the yantra either, but within a matter of minutes the child was born. That is the power of yantras. Now I understand why all these old friends of yours keep pestering you to heal them or their family members. It's because they know your capabilities. Having learned a few of my capabilities, they are trying to capitalize on them for their own benefit. Some of them have even told me that I should start healing the sick en masse. But besides the fact that the fame from such programs would ruin my life, what about the Runanubandhana? I have to have an appropriate Runanubandhana with someone in order to heal them. Is that true of any doctor? Yes, and of any astrologer or any other professional who wants to help someone out. But there are so many people with whom I have Runanubandhanas that if I tried to heal all of them at once, I would run out of Shakti before very long. I am not Jesus, and I have never claimed to be a Bhagwan. Sometimes even my own karmas become too much to bear, and I've even had to use some funny business to cure myself. I don't like to do it because I believe that it is better to suffer now and be free of the burden of your karmas rather than hide away from them. After all, they are sure to catch up with you anyway, eventually. But in a crisis you do whatever is necessary. Some years ago, Dr. Duranda lived in Bombay. Somehow or other, he had lost his son and nearly went mad as a result. Afterwards, he began to treat me like I was his son. He was always coming around to see how I was and to check on my health. He would give me medicine whenever I needed it, and sometimes even when I didn't. When I needed antibiotics, he would usually give me an injection of penicillin. But one day, when he was out of penicillin, he gave me streptomycin instead. I had never taken streptomycin before, and once had a severe reaction to it. High fever, rigors, the works. I thought I was done for. I called some of my friends who sat around me crying, thinking I was going to die. So did I. Faram was abusing me, as was his wont. The days he didn't abuse me, I would ask him, "What, my child? I have heard none of your beautiful language today. Are you ill?" That would start him off again, insulting my family members with the foulest of words. I enjoyed it. It was his peculiar way of expressing his love for me. Just as Faram was abusing Dr. Duranda left and right for giving me the injection, Dr. Duranda unexpectedly arrived to check on his patient. I couldn't let him see me in this condition. When he looked at me, he saw his son, and if he saw me near death now, it would be a big shock for him that might prove fatal. So somehow the fever disappeared and I became perfectly normal again. I complimented him on his treatment, made him happy and showed him the door. And as soon as he left, the fever returned and Faram started to abuse me again. Then I lost my temper. I told Roshni to bring me her quilt. It was a beautiful brown satin quilt which her father had brought for her from Burma, and she never lent it to anyone. It was so precious to her that she slept with it each and every night, but as soon as she heard that I wanted it, she handed it over to me. I told her to cover me with it, and after about 5 minutes, I threw the quilt on the floor. I was perfectly all right, but the quilt was hot. All the fever had gone into it. There it lay, literally shivering by itself on the ground. I told Faram, "Be careful now. Whoever uses this quilt next will get the fever." Then Faram abused everyone loudly, and shouting out the Parsi equivalent of "Not in my house," had Roshni throw it out the window. And that was it? That was all. I was cured. Don't ask me how. But if somehow you transferred your fever to the quilt, where did your karmas go? They must have somehow gone into the quilt too. Something like that. I cringed slightly, thinking of whoever must have picked it up and then said to him. So the moral of the story is to never pick up anything from the street. Especially not in India, he laughed.